On the morning of August 17, 1942, a teletype operator in Washington received a mission report from the 8th Air Force. The date stamp was correct. The location was not. 12 B-17 Flying Fortresses had struck Rouen deep inside occupied France and returned to England. That much was expected. What was not expected was the timing. The report arrived 36 hours ahead of schedule. General Henry Arnold read it twice, then checked the wire for transmission errors. There were none. Spring 1942, Washington, D.C., the War Department. Henry Harley Arnold sat behind a desk stacked with casualty estimates, production schedules, and intelligence summaries from every theater of war. He was 56 years old, a pilot since 1911, one of the first men taught to fly by the Wright brothers themselves. Now he directed the largest expansion of air power in human history. The United States Army Air Forces existed more on paper than in the sky. Hundreds of airfields were under construction. Thousands of aircraft rolled off assembly lines each month. Tens of thousands of young men crowded into training schools across the Sun Belt. But combat-ready heavy bomber groups were scarce. As of May 1942, the 8th Air Force could count its operational B-17 squadrons on one hand. Arnold understood the math. Europe was 6,000 miles away. The Luftwaffe controlled the continent. RAF Bomber Command had flown night raids for 2 years and was losing crews faster than it could replace them. Daylight bombing, the American doctrine, remained untested in combat. Theory held that the B-17's defensive armament and high-altitude formation flying would allow unescorted penetration of enemy airspace. Theory had never encountered a Focke-Wulf 190. Arnold's greatest fear was not losses, it was irrelevance. If American bombers failed to prove themselves in 1942, the strategic air war would pass entirely to the British. Resources would be diverted. Doctrine would be rewritten. The independence of American air power, the foundation of everything Arnold had built since 1939, would collapse before it truly began. In June, the first B-17s of the 97th Bombardment Group arrived in England. They landed at Polebrook, then moved to Grafton-Underwood. The crews were young. Training was incomplete. Navigation over the North Sea and through weather was a skill many had never practiced. The aircraft themselves were still being refined. Oxygen systems froze. Guns jammed at altitude. Turrets failed in combat temperatures. But there was no more time. On August 9, Arnold sent a coded message to Major General Carl Spaatz, commander of the 8th Air Force. The message was blunt. The president wanted results. The British were skeptical. Congress was watching. A mission had to be flown before the end of the month. It had to strike a target in occupied Europe. It had to demonstrate that American heavy bombers could attack in daylight and return. Spaatz read the message at his headquarters at Bushy Park west of London and forwarded it to Brigadier General Ira Eaker, commander of 8 Bomber Command. Eaker reviewed weather forecasts, crew readiness reports, and intelligence maps, then selected a target, Rouen, a railway marshalling yard 100 miles beyond the English Channel, defended but not heavily, within range of RAF Spitfire escort, close enough for inexperienced crews to navigate, distant enough to matter. The mission was scheduled for August 17. Arnold waited in Washington. He slept poorly. He had staked the future of the Army Air Forces on the belief that precision daylight bombing could shorten the war. If the first mission failed, that belief would become far harder to defend. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe. The men of the 97th Bombardment Group were not veterans. They were products of an assembly line as vast as the one that built their aircraft. Most were in their early 20s. They had between 200 and 400 flight hours. Some had never seen combat. None had flown a bombing mission over Europe. Their commander was Colonel Frank Armstrong, 36 years old, a meticulous planner known for calm under pressure. Armstrong did not fly often, but when he did, he led from the front. He would fly the lead aircraft on the Rouen mission. In the left seat beside him sat Major Paul Tibbets, a pilot whose name would later become synonymous with a very different mission. The crews assembled for briefing on the afternoon of August 16. The target was revealed, Rouen-Sotteville, a rail yard. The route was traced across the channel, landfall near Dieppe, then south along the Seine. Altitude, 23,000 feet, 6,000 pounds per aircraft. For squadrons of RAF Spitfires, the navigators studied their charts. The bombardiers checked their Norden sights. The gunners loaded belts of .50 caliber ammunition into turrets and waist positions. Everything was done by checklist. There was no bravado. These men had been trained to think of flying as a technical problem. Emotion was a distraction. At dawn on August 17, engines started. 12 B-17s in fresh olive drab paint taxied into position. The aircraft were named but not yet famous, Butcher Shop, Birmingham Blitzkrieg, Johnny Reb. The names were painted beneath cockpit windows in white block letters. Each aircraft carried 10 men. Armstrong's bomber, Butcher Shop, led the formation. Tibbets advanced the throttles. Foresight Cyclone engines roared to full power. The bomber surged down the runway, lifted, and retracted its landing gear. One by one, the others followed. They formed up over the English countryside, 3 squadrons, staggered altitudes, tight spacing. The formation was called a combat box. It was designed to concentrate defensive firepower and shield the vulnerable belly and nose of each aircraft. The theory was sound. It had never been tested under sustained fighter attack. At the Channel coast, the Spitfires joined them. RAF pilots weaved above and behind the bombers, scanning the sky for German fighters. The weather is clear, visibility unlimited. Every man in every aircraft understands what this mission represents. If it succeeded, there would be more. If it failed, there might not be. The doctrine that placed those bombers over France was born in the classrooms of the Air Corps Tactical School during the 1930s. It rested on 3 core assumptions. First, that the heavy bomber was fast enough and flew high enough to evade most interceptors. Second, that concentrated defensive fire from tightly packed formations would drive off any fighter that closed to effective range. Third, that the Norden bombsight, under clear conditions, could deliver bombs within 100 feet of an aiming point from 4 miles above the ground. All 3 assumptions were disputed. The British had attempted daylight bombing in 1939 and 1940. Losses had been catastrophic. By 1941, RAF Bomber Command had shifted entirely to night operations. Accuracy declined, but survival rates improved. The British position, stated bluntly to Arnold and Spatz, was that unescorted daylight bombing amounted to suicide. Arnold disagreed, not emotionally, but mathematically. America could produce bombers faster than Germany could manufacture fighters. If losses remained below 10% per mission, the arithmetic favored the bomber. Attrition would slowly erode the Luftwaffe. Factories, refineries, and rail yards would burn. The combined bomber offensive, a joint Anglo-American strategy approved in early 1942, depended on that logic. But there was a problem: fighter escort range. The Spitfire, the best interceptor available to the Allies in 1942, had a combat radius of roughly 175 miles. Beyond that limit, bombers flew alone. The P-47 Thunderbolt, just entering service, could reach approximately 230 miles with drop tanks still insufficient to cover Berlin, the Ruhr, or any target deep inside the Reich. This created a gap, a killing zone between the Channel coast and the German interior. There existed a belt of airspace where American bombers would confront the Luftwaffe without protection. Doctrine claimed they could survive it. Combat would determine whether doctrine was correct. Arnold knew the Rouen mission would not resolve that question. Rouen was shallow, lightly defended, a proof of concept rather than a crucible. But it was the first step. If the crews could not succeed at Rouen, there was no reason to attempt the Ruhr. In Washington, Arnold waited. The mission was scheduled to last 4 hours. Takeoff at 15:30 Zulu. Wheels down by 19:30. A liaison officer was assigned to monitor the teletype for updates. Arnold instructed him to forward any report immediately. Regardless of the hour, Arnold spent the evening reviewing aircraft production figures. B-17 output was climbing. B-24 Liberators were being diverted from the Pacific. New groups were forming weekly, but none of it mattered if the bomber could not survive daylight combat. The entire structure of American air strategy rested on that single assumption. The next morning, August 18, Arnold received the first report. All 12 bombers had returned. No losses. Target struck. Limited flak damage, 1 crewman wounded. He read it carefully, then checked the timestamp. The report was dated August 17, 1942, sent at 20:15 Zulu, received in Washington at 20:34 Zulu, 49 minutes after the bombers landed. It should have taken at least a day, perhaps 2, for mission results to be compiled, transmitted across the Atlantic, and delivered to his desk. Operational summaries in 1942 moved by encrypted cable and often by courier pouch when classification demanded it. Initial radio traffic confirmed aircraft recovery, but detailed bomb damage assessments, crew debriefs, and formation analyses required time. Arnold read the report again and understood what he was seeing. Not a delay, an acceleration. Someone in England had prioritized this mission above all others. The report had been coded, transmitted, decoded, and routed to his desk faster than standard procedure allowed, faster than any previous mission summary from any theater. It arrived 36 hours ahead of the norm. The decision to fast-track the Rouen report did not originate with Arnold. It came from Eaker. Eaker understood the political reality. The 8th Air Force was under scrutiny from every direction. Churchill doubted the Americans could succeed where the RAF had failed. Roosevelt needed a victory to justify the Europe First strategy to a public still shaken by Pearl Harbor. Arnold needed proof that his doctrine worked, and Eaker needed to preserve his command. On the afternoon of August 17, as the bombers returned to Grafton Underwood, Eaker was already drafting the summary. He did not wait for full debriefs. He did not wait for reconnaissance photographs. He watched the aircraft land, counted them, confirmed the target was struck, and sent the report. It traveled by encrypted cable to Bushy Park, then to the War Department Signal Center in Washington, and finally to Arnold's desk. Total time was under 90 minutes from wheels down to delivery. In the context of 1942 communications, this was extraordinary. It reflected desperation as much as efficiency. Arnold read the report and immediately understood what Eaker was doing. He was proving that American bombers could operate in daylight, and he was proving it quickly enough to matter. Timing was strategy. Had the report arrived 2 days later, the news cycle would have moved on. Congressional attention would have drifted. The opportunity to shape perception would have closed. But there was risk. Speed sacrificed thoroughness. The report contained no bomb damage photographs. It lacked detailed after-action interviews. It did not quantify bombing accuracy or fully assess German defenses. What it did include was the only figure that mattered in Washington on August 18, 1942, 0 losses. Arnold picked up the phone and called the officer responsible for public relations. He ordered a press release prepared. Then he called Spatz. The conversation was brief. Arnold made one directive clear: do it again. The second mission flew 2 days later. The target was a Luftwaffe airfield near Abbeville. 24 B-17s took off. All returned. The third mission on August 21 struck Rotterdam. The fourth followed, then the fifth. Each mission pushed slightly deeper. Each tested a different variable: higher altitude, longer escort range, heavier flak. By the end of August, the 8th Air Force had flown 6 missions and lost 1 bomber. The survival rate exceeded 98%. Arnold read each report as it arrived. They came faster now. Eaker had streamlined the process. Initial summaries reached Washington within hours. Full intelligence reports followed by courier. The acceleration was deliberate. Arnold wanted the War Department, the White House, and the press to see tempo, not isolated successes, but momentum. In early September, Arnold flew to England. He visited Grafton Underwood, walked the hardstands, and spoke with crews. He did not congratulate them. He asked questions. How long did formation take? How accurate was the Norden at 23,000 feet? How effective was defensive fire? Were oxygen systems holding? The crews answered carefully. The missions so far had been shallow. The Luftwaffe had not yet committed in force. Flak had been moderate. Formation discipline was improving, but gaps remained. Some pilots were overly cautious, others too aggressive. Lead bombardiers were still learning to compensate for wind drift at altitude. Arnold listened. He knew what they were not saying. The easy missions were over. The Luftwaffe was watching. German intelligence was analyzing American tactics. The next phase would be harder. But the doctrine had survived first contact with reality. That was enough. On September 6, Arnold returned to Washington. He drafted a memo to General George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff. It was titled 8th Air Force Operations, Preliminary Assessment. It ran 3 pages. The conclusion was a single sentence: daylight precision bombing is feasible. Marshall forwarded the memo to the president. The Germans read the same data and reached different conclusions. By late August, Luftwaffe intelligence had identified the American bomber formations as B-17s operating from East Anglia. Altitude, speed, and formation tactics were noted. Fighter units in northern France were briefed. New interception procedures were drafted. The German assessment was cautious. The Americans were inexperienced. Their formations were tight but predictable. Escort range was limited. They had not yet attacked heavily defended targets. The shallow missions were training runs. The real test would come when bombers flew beyond Spitfire range. That test arrived on October 9, 1942. The target was the 5 steel works deep in northern France. 108 B-17s took off. German fighters intercepted in force. 4 bombers were shot down. 36 were damaged. It was the highest loss rate the 8th Air Force had yet suffered. Arnold read the report in Washington. He did not panic. He calculated that 4 out of 108 equaled 3.7% acceptable, sustainable. He sent a message to Eaker: continue operations. But the calculus was changing. The Luftwaffe was learning. German fighter tactics evolved. Head-on attacks, once rare, became routine. The B-17's nose, defended only by handheld guns, proved vulnerable. Losses began to rise. By December, average loss rates approached 5%. Still sustainable, but margins were narrowing. Arnold ordered chin turrets installed on all new B-17Gs. He accelerated P-47 deployment. He pushed drop tank production, but the fundamental problem remained. Escort range was constrained by fuel and physics. The killing zone deepened. In early 1943, the 8th Air Force began missions into Germany, the Ruhr, Wilhelmshaven, Schweinfurt. Losses were staggering. Some missions saw 10% fail to return, others 15%. The calculations Arnold had relied on in August no longer held. The bomber was not surviving deep penetration without escort. Arnold did not retreat. He doubled down: more bombers, more groups, more raids. He correctly believed the Luftwaffe could not sustain its own attrition, but the cost was immense. Entire crews were lost on their 5th or 6th mission. The statistical life expectancy of a B-17 crewman in 1943 was 15 missions, a full tour required 25. By the summer of 1943, the doctrine Arnold defended was in crisis. The British press labeled the American strategy a failure. Some American commanders quietly agreed. Proposals emerged to shift the 8th Air Force to night bombing. Arnold rejected them all. In November 1943, the P-51 Mustang entered service. With drop tanks, it could escort bombers to Berlin and back. The killing zone closed. Loss rates fell. The combined bomber offensive resumed at full strength. By Germany's surrender in May 1945, the 8th Air Force had flown more than 10,000 missions, dropped 700,000 tons of bombs, and lost over 4,000 heavy bombers and 26,000 men. Rouen, the first mission, cost almost nothing by comparison. It proved everything. Henry Arnold retired in 1946. He was the only Air Force officer ever to hold 5-star rank. He suffered multiple heart attacks during the war. The strain of commanding an Air Force that grew from 20,000 men to 2 million in 4 years left permanent damage. He lived 4 more years, long enough to witness the creation of an independent United States Air Force, the institution he had devoted his life to building. He never spoke publicly about the August 17th report. There were no memos, no speeches, no interviews highlighting that it arrived 36 hours ahead of schedule. In the vast archive of Arnold's wartime correspondence, the speed of that single transmission is a footnote, if it appears at all. Yet the timing mattered. The report reached Washington while momentum was still possible. It shaped media coverage, influenced congressional briefings, and reinforced the argument Arnold had advanced since 1939. That argument was simple: air power, properly applied, could decide wars. Proper application required autonomy, resources, and time. The Rouen mission secured all three. The doctrine it validated was imperfect. It cost thousands of lives. It required technologies that did not yet exist in 1942. It depended on industrial capacity no other nation could match. But it worked, not because bombers were invulnerable, but because the institution behind them refused to stop adapting. Arnold understood what his critics did not: doctrine is not doctrine until it survives contact with the enemy. Everything before that is theory. Rouen was the moment theory became doctrine. It was shallow, cautious, and brief. It proved nothing about deep penetration, unescorted survival, or the B-17's endurance against a fully committed Luftwaffe. But it proved American bombers could take off, cross occupied Europe, drop bombs, and return. In August 1942, that was enough. The report that arrived 36 hours early was not an accident. It was a signal. Eaker sent it. Arnold read it. The institution responded. Missions continued. Doctrine evolved. And the air war, right or wrong, became what Arnold had always believed it could be: not a sideshow, not a support arm, but a force capable of breaking nations. That belief, tested over Rouen on a clear summer morning, defined the next 3 years of war and shaped every air campaign that followed.